Alistair, welcome to the Tech First Talks podcast.
Hi, nice to be here.
And welcome to Amsterdam. You got some nice sunny weather, which...
Indeed, I mean, I'm actually stunned that it's been so sunny this week. I mean,
so are we.
Was rain.
I know, we are stunned, but we're very happy with that.
Yes.
So why don't we start out by you telling us a little bit about your background and what role you play in the IoT ecosystem? Because we are going to go deep into IoT today, so you might as well establish some credibility up front.
Well, I don't know about credibility. I've certainly been hanging around for a long time. I've been in this space in one way or other for the last 25 years. And I kind of have done it in reverse. I started out building solutions in a kind of consulting capacity, systems integrated capacity. Then I went to the platform side. I joined Microsoft and incubated what, eventually through many iterations and many more smart people than me, turned into Azure IoT. Went from there to Hitachi to build the Hitachi Lumada platform with a bunch of other crazy people. And then from there went to a semiconductor business called Semtech to build LoRa. To take LoRa from being an idea and a first stage silicon offering to what it is today, which is an ecosystem-driven component of industrial and enterprise IoT solutions in general. Left Semtech and then went to a company called Blues, which is also in the communication space, really offering a platform that abstracts away from any wireless technology. You can use anything you want. And then from there, I've spent the most of the last year running a startup in the human-machine interface space. I've kind of gone from full meal deal of building solutions through to building enabling technologies. And I did that for quite a simple reason, actually. When I was building solutions in a consulting capacity, we were charging clients $10, $15 million, $20 million to build an end-to-end solution. And it became really apparent to me, and we're talking back in, where are we now, 90s. Even then, it was pretty easy to see that IoT technologies were going to be a fairly major tool to help us address what was emerging then as the climate crisis, and is now fully upon us. Because IoT allows us to really align the kind of the commercial capitalist goals of making more money from less staff with actually doing it in a way that doesn't burn the planet to the ground. And when I was working building solutions, nice lucrative business that it was also obvious to me that if we stayed in that model, there were only going to be a few companies that would actually be able to afford it. And ironically, the companies that could afford it were the ones that actually weren't causing so much the damage. It was the dirty, old industries that were pre-industrial age in some respects, like minerals extraction, etc., that were really, really driving the problem. And that if those businesses were going to be able to adopt IoT, it was going to be by building their own solution for which they needed a cloud platform.
Before we go too deep into the IoT side, I do want to come back to this about your background, because you've been doing a lot in technology and IoT for a very long time. But you're also an old telco guy, but you studied law and economics at university. I find this interesting because I thought my career was pretty screwed up because I studied finance and economics. I was an investment banker, went to consulting. You also went to consulting.
You, by the way, for being investment.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I'll tell you some horror stories. Asset-backed securities, we were doing them back in the early 90s. Skip that for now. But we both then ended out in telecoms, and we were both at O2 at the same time in the early 2000s and didn't even know each other.
Yeah, and it was miraculous. I think you were in Hammersmith and I was in lovely Slough. Come lovely bombs fall on Slough, in the words of the poet. But yeah, O2 was a fun space to be. It was a complete basket case of a company. When I joined in 2000, in the days when it was called BC7. You helped drive the digital side of the business.
Yes.
It turned out to be a major reason why O2 became successful. But yeah, I started out doing a law degree and an economics degree and realized pretty quick, by virtue of 2 summer internships with Clifford Chance, actually, that the last thing I wanted to be was
working for a magic circle firm as well.
Oh man, the first year I worked in the IP department, and my job was driving around London in a taxi cab, buying all of Apple Records back catalogue, Beatles, all the Beatles albums, because the case that I was working on was a litigation suit between Apple Computer and Apple Records. And so it was the most inane thing. I mean, I was spending £1,000 a day on buying LPs and sticking them with a black cab that I would have all day driving around London racking up the bill. The next year I worked in the capital markets department working on financing for this longest bridge in the world in Norway. And I'll say this. I found lawyers and with notable exceptions, several of who I have very close friends with lawyers, that there's a certain beauty in the law, in the intricacy of it, but the actual practice of the law and the people that practice it, just they're probably like investment bankers.
Yeah.
And I also,
Oh, I worked with a lot of proper wankers. Trust me.
I've always tried to avoid people who have the level of ego that I witnessed, in a law firm, because I think, the moment you think that you know everything it precedes doom, shortly thereafter. But I ended up in technology largely by accident, and I'm not a software engineer. I'm not a hardware engineer. I think the gap that I saw, I guess, and it's easy to post-rationalize a career, isn't it? To look back and go, well, it was all planned, because obviously it wasn't. Was that, in the space that you and I are in IoT, the problem is not a technology one. It's never been a technology one. It's actually been about understanding business and understanding how to build a business and understanding how to meet customer needs. Most of what I've done through my career really has come down to shaping what are brilliant technical ideas and brilliant engineers into businesses that actually solve real world problems. Because it's very, very easy to get lost in the technology, to get down into the depths of it and become fascinated by it and the genius of it, and lose sight of the fact that mostly customers don't care. They just want a business problem.
And I think the reason we get along is because we both think along those lines.
Yeah.
The problem is the rest of the industry doesn't always do that. And let's look at what's happened let's just go like the last 10, 12 years about how IoT, when it first became a buzzword and blew up, and suddenly there was these massive market forecasts for connections and market size, and then it got quiet. So we really didn't understand that. We pushed the tech. So what do you think, like in those early days, what did we get wrong as an industry? Because obviously people weren't thinking about the solutions. They were talking too much about tech.
I think the first thing that really set us on the wrong path was the massive forecasts of market potential going back 15 years, I can't remember when it was that Hans Vesterberg stood on stage and had said it's 50 billion. But he and Cisco and other, the numbers were just astronomical.
Wait, I will add IDC, who I used to work for. We had some real proper number. No, we completely screwed the market because we came out in our first forecast and said it was going to be valued at 7.1 trillion. 6 months later, we revised it down to 1.7 trillion and nobody picked it up. And that's when I knew the market was screwed. I thought we were going to get hammered by everybody. No one picked up that we just knocked off 70% or 80% of our forecast. And it was like, oh, great, still a big number. But I mean, we got too fixated on those numbers. So sorry, please, now back over to you.
Well, I mean, I think it was partly just the scale of the number that was the problem, but it was also the imagining that it was going to be new money. Because, I mean, you could debate, what is the value of IoT? Well, to a degree, it's the value of industry, but it's not a different value. It's the same number. And so the notion that there was going to be 50 billion new things generating $7 trillion, it was just a fallacy from the get-go. And it was something that companies who knew better actually used as a tool to bolster shareholder confidence, to raise money. And it attracted a flood of money into the market in the early days. And that was really the second mistake, because I think there are many examples that I saw in Microsoft of what a colleague of mine used to say. Yeah, this is what happens when you put a bag of $1 million in a room with 20 engineers, shut the door and turn the lights off. They make something with it. And so there was a lot of money coming into the space. The influence of venture capital, I've always been somewhat ambivalent about, and I'm sure there are some VCs watching this, and they've certainly played a positive role in many regards. But the influence of venture capital in the early days was big money looking for fast returns. And that created a pressure on early market entrants to capture market share, to control customers, to lock them in, to build end-to-end solutions that fulfilled all of their needs and dreams. And that principle set us on a path that it has taken until now, actually, and it is still continues to be an issue, where we were misleading ourselves that somehow one technology or one company could quote unquote solve the problem. When if we had looked at this as an industry problem, not a technology problem, and we had looked at the industries and actually, talked to customers in those industries and asked them what the hell they were trying to do, we would have realized that what we were doing was really just gluing together different islands of data and telemetry and need and insight with little piece part technologies, and that we had to work with the existing technologies and we had to work with each other to deliver solutions that those customers wanted. So in those early days, you had, 50-person startups claiming to have solved the world's problems, trying to sell those solutions into global companies. And global companies looking at them going, well, are you kidding me? You expect me to, delegate my supply chain to you? You're going to be here next year? So I think that kind of beginning set us on the wrong path, and it took at least 10 years for us to recover.
I think also during that period, we worked on our own. We didn't work collaboratively. And what people fail to understand is any IoT solution involves multiple products from multiple vendors to create one solution. You get an endpoint, connects the data, sends it out to a number of different types of platforms, to an app. It's got to be secured. You got to have systems integration. That's many players. And we just always try to do it alone. And it made no sense. Or someone's like, I can do the full stack. No, you can't. No. But then we finally got to that point where we were going to have the connectivity sorted out a bit because we were going to have low power WAN. But then you had all the LPWAN wars and the divided factions between NB-IoT, Sigfox, and LoRa. And you've gotten to work across a lot of those over the years. What do you think we really screwed up during those years?
It was the notion that one would solve them all. That whether it was pick LoRa, Sigfox, NB-IoT, IoT, there's a plethora of different technologies. I think we focused on the technologies building, and as true engineers became obsessed about the strength of that particular technology. And I think as part of human nature, unfortunately, that if you think one thing is great, it means the other thing is bad. And so that was an aspect. I think the money in the background was also an aspect. This kind of pressure to say, well, you need to own the market. You need to, if you're going to capture all this huge share and justify the investment we gave you, you're going to be the one, aren't you? The other thing I would say is we focused on our customer, believed our customer to be like us, to be a software engineer or a hardware engineer, when in actuality, most of the customers with big problems to solve were in old, dirty industries, like water distribution industry, where people aren't software engineers or hardware engineers, at least not in the context that we thought of them as being. They are, they're engineers, but they're used to managing operational systems. And so we designed products for people like us, not for the actual customer that needed to use those technologies. But the wars between LoRa and Sigfox in particular were deeply unproductive. One of the things I tried to do from the very beginning, actually, with LoRa was to push the idea very strongly that LoRa solves some problems, but not all. That when you saw LoRa implemented, even in those early days, it was very often with a cellular backhaul. It was very often with hardwired backhaul. It was very, the technologies were blended from the get-go. Now, in the case of LoRa, obviously, there was pressure from my board and the shareholders to grab the market. The idea that, well, actually, yes, we will grow, very significantly, but we'll grow in concert with other technologies. If we work with other technologies, we'll grow faster. If we don't, we'll grow slower. And that was hard for people to get their heads around.
It still is. They're getting better. But I remember when they came out with NB-IoT, I remember I got pulled in by the Singapore government because I made a statement that NB-IoT is dead before it launches. And they wanted to know why I was saying that. And I said, well, basically because I think the technology is great. There's not a single solution you're going to run on it. Like none of these telcos know what to do with it. Yeah. It's not like there's a ready-made ecosystem. There's only one country that did a really good job with it, but that was China because they have their 5-year plan. They aligned supply, demand, and investment, and they just said, let's go forward. Yeah. And I remember I used to spend so much time breaking down the Ericsson mobility forecast because Ericsson obviously is very strong in telcos. They compete against Nokia and Huawei, but they're not really selling much in China. Yeah. So they would always use it as Northeast Asia is doing very well. Well, Northeast Asia was China, Japan, Korea. I'm pretty sure the numbers aren't really coming from Japan and Korea on there. So I would find ways to back into it. But China was the perfect example. Why didn't we learn from that?
Well, there's a certain degree of resistance, I think, certainly in the US to learning anything from China, sadly. I think that, on your point regarding telcos, you said you and I were both in O2. Telcos consummately failed to build IoT businesses. And I remember back in the days of T-Mobile and John Horn building out a separate business unit for T-Mobile. We tried everything. When I was O2, we were trying to use the old paging network to run M2M applications. And we failed because in the same way that the telcos failed in the content space, because we were conceited and ego-driven and thought that we somehow owned the market and it was our God-given right to build massive IoT businesses. And I think we failed to understand that we were purely utility providers of connectivity, and it was for others to build the solutions that actually would drive value. I agree. In China, the model is very different. The prescriptive model of you will do it is useful when you're trying to build complex ecosystems, because I think the other, I'd say, obvious aspect of the IoT with hindsight was, it was always going to be an ecosystem-driven thing. And building ecosystems as a horizontal technology provider, whether you're in the connectivity space or the platform space, is not a natural thing to do. It is a very complex thing to do. We were very successful with LoRa. We made a whole bunch of mistakes, and we were lucky that some things worked out. But figuring out how to create an ecosystem of hardware providers, an ecosystem of network operators, an ecosystem of solution providers, systems integrators, how to get all of those people to arrive at the same party at the same time is phenomenally complex. China did it because they said, you're going to the party.
Yes.
You will be at the party at 5 o'clock on Thursday, and everybody showed up. Said, I would still argue that NB-IoT has not been the resounding success in China that it might have been either. I mean, it's been rather a failure elsewhere. And I think, again, from the telcos perspective, the reason that telcos were unable to build M2M and IoT businesses was that they applied the same mindset that they had in their consumer businesses to IoT. And the cost structure and the overhead and the way of operation was just antithetical to what IoT needed. IoT needed cheap and easy. I mean, if you look at the technologies in this space that have done well, and more broadly, technologies that win have three characteristics. They are good enough at the job, fit for purpose. They're not the best. They don't have to be the best. They are simple to use, and they have lots of friends. And it's actually the lots of friends bit always makes the difference. The big ecosystem around LoRa, I mean, you and I have just been at the Things conference, seeing that conference over the last 10 years, actually, it's been evolving. Fortunately, it coincides with my wedding anniversary every year, so there's that. But that community has grown and grown and grown. And today it is a combination of hardware vendors and solution providers and all the way through. It started out as a bit of a pity party. It started out as lots of vendors looking around the room, you got any customers yet? Or I haven't got any customers either. And it's evolved from that into a 2-day show where every single person I spoke to who had a stand there told me that there were customers coming by and they've got 10 meetings next week. So it's turned into a real thing. And that's the ecosystem. I'd love to say it was the beauty and the strength of LoRa, but it wasn't. It was the community.
And they're finally getting there because they have invited in a lot of competitive technologies because you got the guys from Wi-Fi Halo in there.
I don't think they're competitive.
I know, that's it. Well, it's good for backhaul. But I think all these different things have to fit together. And what I believe for what I told Vinka when he was on the podcast before is you need to do this because you've got, 250,000 developers. Those guys need to develop things and stay in business. They can't just do LoRa and stay in business. They have to do what the customer wants. And I think everyone's understanding that. And I was much more pleased this year walking out of than I was last year. Last year, I was getting nervous because it was very fragmented. There wasn't that many big vendors. They got a lot more anchor vendors coming into this time. Yeah. And it seems like we're finally learning. And I'm like, wow, it's only taken us 10 years and we're finally ready to go with IoT a little bit at least. Yeah. And on that note, it's a good thing. Where do you think we are today with IoT?
I think we are still victims of human nature. I genuinely don't believe and think of these different technologies as competing. I think it's a natural inclination that, I built this thing, it's better than everybody else's. I'm in a commercial battle with these other technologies. And obviously to a degree that's true, but it is the contradictory kind of reality that in order to be successful as a business, you have to treat your competitors as, collaborators. You have to actually build technologies that work with each other. I mean, Vinka and Johan, coined the phrase in the first conference, let's build this thing together. And that was really the driving principle behind TTN. And TTN and Vinka and Johan very deliberately I always thought of them as being the de facto developer ecosystem around LoRa. It was very deliberately not something we tried to build at Semtech, because I knew that at Semtech, whether we said it or not, the belief would be that, well, you're just really just trying to push this technology on. And what we needed to do was delegate responsibility for building a developer ecosystem, and those 250,000 developers, all of whom use other technologies, to build a developer ecosystem that spoke to those developers in terms that weren't about competition and that weren't about, one thing is better than the other. So in terms of where we are today, I'm naively optimistic. It's what gets me out of bed every day over all these years. But I think that there is a broader realization of the reality that every IoT solution is a jigsaw of technologies, and those technologies, some are new and some are existing, and some have been some of that equipment's been there for 90 years. When you walk into a hot rolling steel mill and see the Hitachi hot rolling steel mill in the middle of it, and they say, oh yeah, we bought this like 75 years ago and it's still running today. We are at the point where we've realized that. I think the thing that's helped us get there is that there is money flowing in the ecosystem. Like I said, in the early days, it was somewhat of a pity party. There wasn't money flowing and people were competing for a pot of nothing. And when the money started to appear, when enterprises and industries started to see solutions that they could buy, suddenly cooperation became a valuable thing, because if there's a client that needs you and I to work together, guess what? You and I might hate each other, but we're actually going to work together if we've got any degree of common sense.
But isn't a lot of this because they now, like, we're starting to see, we know how it can deliver value.
Yes.
And people are learning, we don't talk about the tech. You better go in with a business case. This is how I'm going to deliver value back to you.
Customers don't get technology.
Agreed.
That's the sad truth. In the earlier days, when I'd go to see customers, with my engineering counterparts, and you would sit and listen to them and leave somewhat crestfallen. I don't want to know what they think about the technology. What I want to know is, what business problem are they trying to solve? And what do we need to give them in order to solve that business problem? As you said, if you don't understand core business problem that your customer is trying to solve and build a solution to that problem, then you're going down the wrong path. That said, if you look at the software industry in particular, the history of the software industry is not listening to customers. It's building things that, like my technology does this thing and it's cool. And customers go, great, what do I do with it? And in the earlier days, we were talking to CTOs, we were talking to the IT side of the house very often. And we were in POC purgatory and building things that never got implemented. In the last 4 to 5 years or so, that conversation shifted to conversations with the COO and the CFO and the CEO. And it's shifted to, I have a business problem that costs me X million, make it go away. And so I think we're still at the beginning, really. I think we have a very big risk at the moment of reverting back to the old failed thinking driven by AI. And AI is now the big shiny thing that's going to be $7 trillion and
7 trillion probably this month. Oh,
yeah.
Another 7 trillion next
and
month.
I could build a unicorn company today and sell it tomorrow. And
Easy peasy, yeah.
Problem at all. I think that there is a danger that those big numbers being thrown around drive the same set of behaviors and take IoT back 10 years.
I think this is interesting because I don't blame just IoT, because there was way too much marketing hype and no one knew what they were talking about. But then what you had right after IoT was smart cities, was prop tech, which are all leveraging IoT solutions. And you had all this money and hype and nonsensical talk about how it's going to transform your buildings and your cities. And finally, there was a few years there, nobody was talking about prop tech. No one was talking about smart cities or IoT. And then the market started to move because we just started focusing on how to deliver it. From my perspective, what I've seen across Asia, Australia, and now in the US as well, a lot of it's much more infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
It's things that it's really easy to figure out. I might sell this sensor housing unit that's going to go into a sewer system and monitor the water levels. But if I could tell you, I'm going to reduce your truck rolls by X%, you don't care how much that costs because that'll save you so much money. We're learning just barely how to do that. But no, you're right. AI is coming in to ruin it for us.
I do think that, useful though they may be from a marketing perspective, the invention of these terms has held us back. I mean, the notion of there being an Internet of Things, to this day, most customers that I talk to don't actually understand what IoT means.
Yeah.
My kids don't understand.
Well, is the term still relevant?
No, I don't think it ever was. I think it was deeply harmful to create this idea that there was somehow a separate new thing that could generate new money from enterprise customers. We made this mistake at Microsoft. The notion that Azure IoT was a separate thing from Azure was one of the reasons that it wasn't successful. And it was driven by, commercial and marketing dreams that, there's going to be this whole new money that's going to come from somewhere and they're going to spend it on IoT. And they're also going to spend all the old money on the other things that we're selling. But when it was always the same pool of money, I think when we evolved from talking about Internet of Things to talking about prop tech and smart cities, that was a positive evolution because at least we were starting to talk about a problem set and about a solution to that problem set. I think AI suffers the same risk in that it's a new thing. It's not. It's just a new set of tools to drive more value more quickly from data that you already have. It's not a separate thing. Engineers, again, I don't like to beat upon engineers. I guess I'm a quasi-engineer at this point myself.
Well, there's none in the room, so we can hammer them now.
It's understandable that you want to draw a box around the thing that you're building and think of it as a new and separate thing, because the technology you're building is a new and separate thing, but it exists in a world that's old and dirty. If you look across industries, they're all fundamentally doing the same thing that they did 50 years ago. They're just doing it with different technologies. The industry underlying it is exactly the same. So I think the evolution to talking about smart cities and prop tech and logistics, etc., was good. But I also agree with you that we've stopped talking about buzzwords and we've started talking about specific customer problems. It's no accident IoT, and I wish I could think of another word that wasn't IoT, but hey, IoT had its largest early stage implementations in things like smart metering, because guess what? You cannot if you don't have to employ someone to walk house to house to read a meter, write it down on a piece of paper, and then go enter it to the system, you save money. And there's also no accident that every single person I know in IoT at some point or other has built a connected machine, because that was the ultimate business case. And well, you don't have truck rolls yet. You don't have to have a guy come around and fill up the vending machine only to find that the vending machine is already full. I mean, it was something that customers could understand. So the more that we talk about real world problems, the more likely we are to be successful. From a marketing point of view, it complicates things because you don't get to talk about one thing, you get to talk about 10,000 use cases. The marketers are like, but how do I have a generic advert that tells people what my technology does or what my... And it's like, well, maybe you can't do that. Maybe it doesn't work.
We're making progress, but I think the best example I heard was from Jaap Groot at the event the other day, and he was talking about how the MP3 from when it was created before you had an iPod was 10 years. And I asked him afterwards, which generation of iPod? Are we talking about the old one or was one of the fancy? It was like the old first generation. So we're still at those baby steps. We have a lot of blockers we still need to overcome right now. But we also have things that are impacting us. Global uncertainty is a nightmare for everybody. We've still got technical challenges, interoperability. Connectivity, if you want a global solution, is still not very easy. And it can be very expensive. So what do you think? What are the biggest problems we need to overcome today?
I think we have, at the moment, we've got enough technologies. We've got enough tools in the toolbox. Some of the combinations are missing. So things like being able to deploy AI at the edge, to be able to analyze data in situ and take action in the moment that something is required. So there's some more combinations, etc. But the problem isn't technology and never been technology. In all honesty, I think the biggest blocker is an ability to understand what customers are trying to do and to be humble in that regard. Again, building new and brilliant things requires a certain level of ego and belief and all of those good things. But a measure of schizophrenia is required as well, to be able to use that energy to build technologies, then to be humble enough when you're out in the market talking to customers to recognize that your role as a technology provider is not to answer the problem, to answer the question. Your role is to understand the problem and understand the question and deliver technologies that solve part of it. That, I think, really is what's holding us back. And to the degree that is human nature. We talked earlier about my background and what brought me into this space. What I've always tried to instill in the business I built is that sense of humility, sense of understanding your role. And your role is providing the nuts and bolts. It's not providing some masterful solution. The other thing is always assume that as an engineer or a product developer, that whatever it is that you're planning to do, your plan is wrong. You just don't know how it's wrong. And your job is not to be right. Your job is to understand why you screwed it up and to talk to your customer and listen to what they say and figure out how to do better the next time. When you hire brilliant engineers, and I've been lucky enough to do that over the years and work with some of the most incredibly intelligent folks, to help those folks go from understanding their own brilliance to understanding that whilst they may know about technology, when it comes to the real problem, they generally don't know anything at all.
I think when I look at the companies I think have actually done a good job of addressing the IoT market opportunities, it's the ones who didn't start with IoT. They started out there, looked at a specific vertical, looked at the pain points within that vertical, and then built a portfolio to solve those pain points. And unfortunately, what happens in telcos, those people get burnt out from the bureaucracy and leave, and you got the skills gap again. So suddenly you've got this portfolio that's about value selling, and then you're like, to the guy who's been selling eSIMs and data packages, now go and sell a complex solution to this industry, and good luck. So that's part of the problem we have.
It is. Imagine that in a silicon scenario where, and we went through a great evolution, I would say, in Semtech. Didn't get all the way there, but evolving from what I always call chip slingers. My job is to go and sell chips, to an understanding that the only way that you sell chips is if everything else is in place. There is a need for the technology that you're providing, and everything else is people who make the hardware, people who build the solutions end to end, people who build the cloud, the ecosystem. And there are some silicon companies that have been successful in building ecosystems. I would count Semtech and the LoRa business amongst those. And there are some, I won't name names, but there are some that have stayed in that model of, my job is to make pieces of silicon and sell as many units as possible to whomever's going to buy them. Some companies have got it. As you said, most of them that have got it and done well have started from a position where they understand the industry. A friend of mine, actually, who I worked with in consulting a few years ago, bought a family-run company called Braco in the water industry. And they're a fine example. Small company in the West Coast US. They built water management solutions for, 80 years or so. And he has built what you would term, if you looked at it, an end-to-end IoT solution. Nowhere upon his website and nowhere in his sales collateral will you find the words IoT. He talks about water management systems, and he sells them to water companies that don't understand technologies like IoT, don't want to understand technologies like those sorts of businesses with that sort of perspective are the ones that are actually out there solving real world problems.
So now let's move on and start looking at some of the regions and how they're doing. So let's look at this globally. And let's start out in the US because that's the one region I try to avoid as much as possible. Despite coming from there, I don't really get involved and don't do much business in the US. So what's going on with IoT in the US? Are we seeing a lot more innovation, implementation, or is it stagnant?
That's a good question. I think that the geographic spread of the US has always presented problems in terms of the networking side of things, connectivity side of things. Companies outside of the cellular companies have struggled with contiguous coverage. What I see in the US is industry-based solutions that are packaged in ways that their customers can understand and use are successful. Those that are not that are not successful in that. I'd include in that, if you look at the big cloud players, they've all spent, Microsoft included, they've all spent a very considerable amount of money building separate IoT platforms. Now, I think problem in that statement, the first problem is the word separate. They were positioned as being separate and new money versus the rest of the cloud platform that they were building. But you've seen companies, and the large folks and also some smaller folks, build out these full end-to-end platforms, all singing, all dancing, do everything you want, make you a cup of coffee in the morning, gradually step back from that position over the course of the last few years. I think Microsoft has probably been the most overt about doing that, but all of the cloud players are doing exactly the same thing. Google also stepped back, disinvested. I think that was really for one very simple reason, that, as I said earlier, what was needed was an end-to-end solution built from an industry perspective, positioned in a way that customers could understand and use. And that was, by definition, not what the cloud platforms were providing. So I think in terms of where the US stands, I think there's a lot of activity under the radar, like I said, not called IoT. I'm just building a better solution for the industry that I'm in. Those things are getting adopted. And I think there's a lot of technology that is built, didn't ever go anywhere because it was positioned as being a separate thing called IoT that no one really understood. I think the attention has pivoted from IoT to AI.
But AI needs more data. So
it does. If we position it as the next big thing, the new technology, it'll be running to exactly the same risk that IoT did, which is that customers look at it and go, I don't know what to do with this. If it's packaged as, well, I've just got a better way of doing X now. I sold you a solution 5 years ago, allowed you to optimize the way that this machine worked and gave your operators information that allowed them to switch it off when it was going to break down. Now I'm selling you a better version, which actually shuts it down for you. It goes the next step, and it moves from an augmentive AI-driven model into a more agentic, and it will do things for you. I do think that the risk in that transition, aside from it being a new big shiny thing, is that if we don't design it from a human-driven perspective, we don't design systems with empathy, with the goal of actually enhancing how people work rather than replacing people, these technologies won't be adopted.
What I'm fascinated with AI, and particularly generative AI, is that we as the consumers have driven the huge adoption of it, and we're using it for work. And inside of companies, we're not even addressing the fact that this is probably ruining productivity in the near term because people are learning how to do it. They don't understand the security risks that we're going to be exposed to. We're just sort of jumping on this path without ever really thinking it through. And that's why you see all the stats from MIT. And there's another one that just came out from Harvard Business Review about AI slop, which I love. Now they're calling it work slop. It is fascinating how we're just jumping on this path and not thinking about what are the risks, what are the opportunities. When you're talking about we need some empathy and actually understanding the human outcomes that is going to deliver them, the impact on humans, good luck with that when there's a lot of money floating around. Right now, everyone's just going to throw money. And when money comes into play, people don't care about ethics. Ethics, we don't need no stinking ethics. Now let's flip over. So US, I'm relatively bullish on the US because I know a lot of people who are doing business there. It's moving a lot faster than we see here in Europe. And I think this is one thing I've learned coming back from 15 years in Singapore is things move a lot slower here. The innovation isn't here. There's not a VC ecosystem to support an innovative environment. So people want to invest in things that are more fit for purpose and ready to go and very stable. They don't need to see super high growth rates, but they want to see consistent growth rates. So it hasn't moved as much, but that's my opinion on looking at Europe. And you've been looking at it for a long time as well. What do you see in Europe right now?
I think Europe was quicker to adopt the notion of collaboration. That maybe rose-tinted spectacles on my part. Very existence of organizations like the Things Industries, TTN, Vinke and Johan. There's been a lot more push collaboration. There is always the political dynamic in Europe, which when I explain it to my American colleagues, I always say that you got to realize that everybody's fought everybody else at some point. Everybody's invaded everybody else. Everyone's murdered each other. There's a rich backdrop of conflict in Europe from nation to nation and between different language groups. Even with that, there is a degree of collaboration. I think Europe has quietly adopted what I guess we have to call IoT solutions for things like logistics, for things like utility industries in the background.
Industrial manufacturing, I think as well.
I think in Europe, there has been a very positive influence from private equity. And I distinguish between private, and to be clear, I think VCs do play a useful role. I think money is the problem. Lots and lots of money. If you're again, not to be ageist, but if you're a young 20-something with a great idea and you can go to a VC and raise $50 million on the basis of a PowerPoint deck, there's a problem with that model, and you're probably not going to spend that money wisely. And that actually has nothing to do with age. If you can go walk into a VC and walk out with a bag of $50 million without actually having ever built a product or served a customer, or even more than $50 million if you've got AI in your name, that's a deeply damaging thing. But private equity operators in the main, and I work with several, coming from a more industry-driven background with a more long-term view, I think play a positive role in Europe in a way that they are not quite so visible in the US. I think the fact that complexity of logistics systems in Europe and the fact that Europe is a hell of a lot smaller, lends itself to the adoption of some technologies. But I think the complexity of Europe at a political level, the language level, and everything else level, added to the complexity that is inherent in IoT, has held things back. In the US, I think it's the complexity of too much money that has caused people to build things that no one ever wanted and technologies that no one ever needed. I think the more managed economies like China, you've seen, as you said earlier, you've seen some major strides. Other managed economies like Russia, you haven't seen that sort of advance. Naively optimistic about things. I see the green shoots happening as you do. And I'm hopeful that the pace of adoption, I don't care about innovation, the pace of adoption is picking up now and will continue to escalate.
I think there's the one reason I'm more bullish about Europe, even though there's a lot of things that move slow, is they do have a lot of the very large companies that service the industrial manufacturing sector. So you have your Siemens, you have Bosch. Bosch was at the Things conference this week. The fact that they're getting back into this game, even in LoRa and getting out there, they've always been excellent at building an ecosystem. They always had Bosch Connected World. So they get that. They already have the client base. It's a matter of almost probably navigating Bosch to get through to the right people in your client, because the industries they cover are the ones that benefit the most in the near term on this. So I'm bullish on that. Now, let's move on to the nice simple one called Asia Pacific. So it's at about 4 billion people probably, or I think it's 4.6 billion people. We've already talked about China. What about some of the other markets there? Anything interesting for you?
We tend not to think about those markets, don't we? We tend not to think about countries like which has a massive slice of the world's population, and the underdeveloped economies versus the more developed economy, where, wireless first, these countries where they are essentially skipping the rest of the world went through in the last 20 years and going straight into a wireless-driven world, wireless broadband, and the adoption of new technologies. I think they are very fertile areas for the solutions that IoT can enable. I think the challenge is, in some instances, the ability to fund. If you look at Indonesia as a country, there are major initiatives underway in Indonesia to deliver connected metering products, logistics products, those sorts of solutions. But it's a complex political environment. It's kind of China without the central control. There's a central authority that makes decisions, but they don't have the same degree of control and influence over what actually happens. So I think there is an enormous opportunity. If we can also use these technologies to help these countries as they go through the process of industrializing, we have an opportunity to avoid the mistakes of the past. We have an opportunity to help these countries generate and use energy in a more efficient, less harmful way. And then if we don't do that, if we're not successful, then we're going to see another phase of deep damage to the global climate. So there is an opportunity, there is an absolute necessity, there is complexity, but what's needed to kind of break through all of that is a packaged set of solutions that companies that are not software engineer and hardware engineer driven, that they're able to adopt. I mean, and there's a lesson from the past that we can learn from here. When you look back at enterprise software back in 20 or 30 years ago, companies used to build their own ERP systems. They spend millions of dollars with consulting companies and build their ERP solutions. How did we end up in a world where most companies have ERP solutions running? Well, it was called customizable off-the-shelf solutions, packaged end-to-end solutions that are customized. And that model is one that needs to be replicated in IoT. I want to be able to buy a logistics solution that is 95% baked, and I want to be able to customize the 5% so it fits with my company and the problem I'm trying to solve, and I want to get on with it. I want it to be cheap, and I want it to be easily used by people who are not expert. If we can deliver those sorts of solutions into the bucket of the developing world countries, then we have a chance of avoiding more self-harm as humans. If we fail, which there's every possibility that we might, we won't.
It's really hard in a lot of the lower income countries across Southeast Asia, because you might have a solution that works in Singapore, but that price point won't work across the rest of the region. The other thing is, a lot of times the value you're going to deliver is by reducing headcount, because you can do something automatically. In some of those countries, the cost of a headcount or a person's time isn't that much. Years ago, when we were looking at IoT, they were talking about how you could automate some of the highways and motorways in India. But the thing is, the people that they have there, there might be 10 guys sitting there in front of these things, like collecting money from you and passing you through. Those guys don't cost anything. So anything you're doing is still an additional cost to what they do today. So I think it's a challenging one. There's a lot of opportunity. One of the other problems we have in Southeast Asia is the VC industry is basically tanked completely. Yeah. So they're going to be struggling for a while. But let's move on to the next one, because we haven't hit the Middle East, which is the one I'm most excited by, because it's got the combination of, it's got the money. All the tech brands moved from Singapore when that was the innovation hub, and they moved over to Dubai or Riyadh. You also have all the top tech talent was moving over there from Southeast Asia. So all the expats are now thinking, why am I going to pay 15% tax when I can pay 0? So you've got it all there, and you've got major initiatives, and you've got a culture that if you get to the right person, deals go quick.
Yep.
So I'm bullish on it.
Yep.
I want to see if they can deliver it. But what are your other thoughts about the Middle East?
Really, there is a combination of characteristics that will help rapid adoption of solutions. I think you're right in saying most IoT solutions in some way or other are viewed through the lens of reducing human capital. You need a hefty dose of empathy as you think about these solutions, because it shouldn't be about replacing.
This is technology. There's no room for empathy. Haven't you seen Facebook? I mean, come on.
Well, let's not go there, but there is, though. That's the thing. I mean, a solution has to be something that is understood, is explainable to the individual who's using it, and it should enhance the process, whatever that process may be, in such a way that it delivers more economic benefit. But think about that economic benefit purely through the lens of, well, I need 10 less people if I have this. It's those people at the end of the day who will choose whether or not to adopt and use these technologies or not. And if you design something that explicitly is going to put them out of a job, Guess what? They won't use it. I think, as you said, when you look at the Middle East, there is a combination of factors there that predispose the Middle East to being able to move quite quickly in IoT. What's needed, again, is that we in the technology space do our freaking jobs, that we actually understand what people are trying to do and design solutions that work around them and with them, enhance the processes that they're responsible for, because then they'll be adopted and then they'll deliver value. If we carry on with the same old approach of, my technology is great and better and, screw you if you can't understand it, then we will fail. And there is really no higher purpose to me than trying to help all of this continue to exist for another 10,000 years.
I mean, sunshine in Amsterdam? I'm just hoping it exists until tomorrow at least.
Well,
one day at a time.
You never know. There might be a lot more of it soon. Not necessarily in a good way. I'm not sure what our goal as technologists is if it's not to enhance the human experience. And I can't think of anything more important in enhancing the human experience than preventing what we have collectively done in the pursuit of profit, destroying this planet for the future generations. It's incumbent upon us as technology providers to be very, very conscious of that. And yes, will we make money along the way? And yes, we will. But if we focus on the outcome rather than the purpose, then we do the wrong thing. If we focus on the purpose, then the outcomes will flow. There'll be money, there'll be profit, there'll be everything else. But it really it does come down to the folks of us, all of us in this industry, understanding that very simple truth. Our job is to solve the world's problems in some respect.
And I think as an industry, we keep rolling out technology for technology's sake, and we forget that technology exists to deliver human outcomes. And if you start with that as your premise and you make it human-centric, probably a better chance of adoption. But I've been ranting about this stuff for so many years now. I think maybe it's just my way of mentioning it isn't working. I need to find a better way to get it to market.
I feel the same.
Yeah.
I feel the same, and it seems so screamingly obvious. I think it's incumbent upon us, you and I, and others who speak about this space, to apply the same principle. It's our job to figure out how to explain this in a way that can be absorbed. And the adage with technology is always, just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should.
Exactly.
If it is technology for technology's sake, then don't do it. I mean, just go and talk to your customer and ask them what they want. And then do that instead.
Well, I guess that kicks off of what we need to do to improve it in the future. But okay, so we've now taken a look at these different regions. Mm-hmm. Now let's take a little bit of a look into the future. Let's go 5 years out. And let's say that IoT, or the technology group of solutions that come together, formerly known as IoT, whatever we call the next buzzword, comes together and the market's really taken off. You're seeing a lot more adoption across all different types of industries, different verticals, different skill sets. So what would have happened? What are those critical success factors going to be for us to make this into a success in the next 5 years?
I think it's end-to-end solutions, integrate multiple technologies and work with other existing solutions. And easy to say, hard to do. If you build it, the difficulty, I think, from an engineering and a product perspective in building an end-to-end solution is understanding what you draw the box around and understanding what happens at the edges of that box. So what is this plugging into? If I build an end-to-end solution, how do I avoid trying to solve the entire problem? I've done numerous joint venture type things over the years. I'm sure you have too. It's really hard. It's very difficult bringing together two different commercial entities around a collaborative business model that rewards rather than punishes collaboration. And it is fighting human nature. It's fighting human nature where, so if this client's going to pay $10 million for this thing, how do I accept and explain to my shareholders that I'm only ever going to get 10, that actually the other 9 million is going to go somewhere else? In some respects, the role of your technology providers like Semtech with Nora is actually easier. The thing that drove the early days of Microsoft, okay, is the principle that for every dollar that we make, everybody else makes 10 or 20 or $30. Getting your head around that, explaining that to profit-hungry investors in the street on a quarterly basis when you have to go and show the upward curve and all the rest of it is complicated, necessary if we're going to be successful.
I think on that, what I'm looking for is simpler connectivity, because right now there's still too much discussion about what type of connectivity. And then if I want to use satellite as well, what does that cost? It's still too complex. So I'd like to see that simplified and making it easier for customers to adopt it, because we're creating the barriers right now because of the way we behave.
And there are some Blue's a company I was with for a while, a COO started by Ray Ozzie, is one of a number of companies that are trying to do that. They created a hardware-based abstraction layer, essentially, single hardware form factor, pull one chip, one module out, stick another one in, and you've got different wireless technology behind the same API. To your point, these technologies need to be simple in and of themselves, but more importantly, they need to be simple to change, to swap one out, change the other, to have a device that can operate on cellular when it's out in the field and LoRaWAN when it's in the factory. Those, by nature, those technologies are typically built by different companies. Yet by definition, therefore, those companies need to figure out a way of working together when in actual fact they're competitors, they're blood enemies. It's human nature. You've got to figure out a way of building a collaborative business model that rewards collaboration rather than rewarding competition, because we can fight all day long over a bucket, but if that bucket doesn't have anything in it, there's no money there, fighting over nothing. Once there's money in the bucket, it gets a lot easier to collaborate because we can kind of see what we're going to get. But it does require people to think differently about the nature of competition and the nature of innovation and the nature of what they're doing to advance their own revenue and profitability and that of their quote unquote competitor.
So now you've spent quite a bit of time in this space in IoT. What if you could go back to the beginning and give yourself one piece of advice, something you should know back then that would have made this easier on you and maybe driven the market, understood sooner and made it better?
I think I would say go and work with the companies that are already in these spaces solving problems for their customers in utilities, their customers in logistics, and work within those companies to build these technologies and integrate them into the existing solution, because they understand the needs of their customers. They may be selling a solution that's utterly devoid of software, but they understand what their customers are trying to do. They have a channel to those customers. They are trusted by those customers, and what they serve up enhances what they're already offering, rather than this brand new shiny thing that comes from this software company in Seattle or Silicon Valley or wherever that has no name recognition in many cases with that customer, that isn't trusted by that customer. Work from within the system to improve the system rather than coming over the top with a new set of technologies. Don't work in this environment where you're surrounded by people who understand the technology, and go work in that environment where it's harder because no one understands what the hell you're talking about, but make yourself understand what they're doing, make yourself understand the nature of the technology that you need to deliver, and help them be more successful, because they're going to get past the finish line quicker than you will.
And now the final question. This is an easy one. Oh, actually, maybe it's the hardest one. I'm not sure. You've had a very unique career path, and I really do respect that. And I mean that because I think mine makes no sense. I have a hard time explaining it. Looking back on your ride and you could do it all over again, would you change anything? Would you go somewhere sooner? Would you try something different going back through this path?
I don't think I would. And I say that mostly because as a hypothetical, better to accept where you are and accept reality. Thank you for saying that about my career largely came by accident. I've got to say.
Agreed. Same
It's
here.
easy. You kind of look back and I can string together the red thread of like, why the hell did I do this and this and this? When the reality is I was lucky enough to have interesting things come along successively over the years that I was like, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to go do that for a while. And that all of those things kind of played into a central narrative that with hindsight actually makes sense, which is kind of bizarre. So I don't know that I would have changed anything. If I could, I would go back to myself 25 years ago and say, just be a bit smarter about this. Don't get focused on the technology. This is not a technical problem. Technology will not solve this problem. The root cause, and this problem being we do shit that destroys the world. This problem is a human problem. It's not a technology problem. Technology is a means to an end. It's not the end. It's just a way of making stuff happen more quickly. That's the only thing that I would really change. But other than that, I mean, I've been extraordinarily fortunate to work with, for, and around people who are a hell of a lot smarter than I am, who understand technologies in ways that I never will. And I've been lucky enough to add a little bit of thought around, well, yeah, this technology is great, but how does this solve a problem? The root of building businesses that are humble by nature is by realizing yourself in the vast array of things that you're terrible at. What are the one or two things that you're actually passingly okay at? And I've been lucky enough, I think, to figure that out over the years. I'm still working on it. I think I've made most of the mistakes you can make in this IoT space? Was it?
I think I can go through my whole career. I've made most of the mistakes you can make. I negotiated a package to leave a company because my mate and I thought, you know what? World Cup's in Japan and Korea. Let's see if we can watch every single match, which means we were literally, he would show up at 6 o'clock at my house. We'd have breakfast and we'd get to the pub by 7 in the morning. I was in my 30s. This was not a wise career choice though. It was just like, do you think we could do that? When are we going to have the opportunity to try again? Let's see what happens. But I think I've gotten lucky as well because I've run into the right people. I've had some interesting opportunities falling in my lap, but I've had a lot of really rough patches as well. But I think that's what makes it exciting. Alistair, thank you so much for coming out to enjoy this beautiful sunny day in Amsterdam. And I wish you all the best in the rest of your time here and your travels. And hopefully you'll come back on next year and let us know what else is going on in IoT in the US and how everything has been solved with that group of technology solutions that were formerly known as IoT.
It's all going to be. We'll have to be talking about AI, I think, next time.
Definitely.
That's going to be the next big thing. No, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Excellent.
I've really enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you very much.